Sunday School Leader. What's coming up this week? Remember, we're in the unit that's entitled Finding Meaning, Wisdom from Ecclesiastes. We're in lesson number 3. It's called The Problem with Wisdom. It's out of Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 12 through 17, and chapter 7, verses 23 through 29. The point of the lesson is wisdom is grounded in trust in God. Well, I hope you're not getting too depressed as we make our way through the book of Ecclesiastes. Just hang in there to week number 6, and we get to find out what the true meaning is. All right. Well, we're going to pick up this week in chapter 2, verse 12. And since future generations are bound to repeat what previous generations have done, what will be for those who succeed me, writes Solomon, who succeed the king? What part will wisdom and madness and folly, all that, what part will all that play in their lives? Well, he comes to discover that there is an advantage of wisdom over folly, and that is being wise is like having eyes, and being foolish is like being blind. And so when you have eyes, you're able to avoid some of the traps. When you're wise, you have the eyes to avoid some of the traps. When you're foolish, you just wander around and do whatever you want to. And we'll see what one of those traps are here in a few minutes. But life is like a vapor, isn't it? We've talked about that. It's like a mist. You're born, you live, and then you die. And that's basically everybody's story in a nutshell. And that little part of your vapor, of your life, it's tough for a lot of folks. For most folks, actually, it's very tough. So even though Solomon didn't pen these words, basically life stinks and then you die, so what's the point? Okay, very encouraging, isn't it? Let's go on down to chapter 7, the verses we have there. Those first 22 verses in that chapter are like a bunch of little proverbs. And if you read the book of Proverbs, you'll see there's a lot of similarity in what's being written here and what's being written in the book of Proverbs. Like it starts off, a good name is worth more than fine perfume. That's a proverb. And so there's a lot of statements in the first part of chapter 7 that contrast wisdom and foolishness, wisdom and folly. And he says, I've tested everything through the lens of wisdom. And he said, I've resolved to be as wise as I can, but it's beyond me. I can't really be truly wise. And why is that? Well, that's because true wisdom is beyond our ability as humans. Even the wisest among us are like fools in comparison to God and his wisdom. So he asks, who can discover it? Well, it's no one, because it's unattainable. And I really think Solomon is writing this toward the end of his life. I'm thinking he sees that his wisdom, put that in quotation marks, his wisdom is really a little bit better than folly. And even though God blessed him with wisdom, he blessed him with the wisdom to lead the nation, to lead people, he still had a weakness. Had a weakness like David. He had a weakness like Samson. Solomon had 300 wives, 700 concubines. That's 1,000 women. Okay, let's keep that number in mind, 1,000 women. All right. Now let's remember, yes, we all have the same fate. We're all going to the grave. We all have death as our final destination, at least under the sun, right, on earth. But there is something, he said, that is even more bitter than death. And that is the woman who is a trap, or being enticed into sexual sin. He goes in to describe some of that. And I wonder if Solomon saw the error of his ways toward the end of his life. You know, I do that, don't you? I think, you know, if I could go back in high school, I'd apply myself more, I'd study more, I wouldn't goof off as much. And so I'm thinking Solomon in his old age is looking back and seeing the error of his ways, when it comes, especially in this area here. And he says that a person that wants to please God will avoid this temptation. Now, like I said, Solomon, as wise as he was, failed in this area. And he considered it a fate more bitter than death. And why is that? Why not just go for the gusto? Okay, we talked about that last week. Why not, you know, if life is like a vapor, just go for it. You know, we're all going to die anyway. Well, here's what I think. All right, and Solomon may not have made this connection, but I believe because the husband-wife relationship is supposed to reflect that relationship between God and humans, and that idolatry in the Bible, idolatry is often referred to as spiritual adultery. And actually Solomon failed in both. He physical adultery as well as spiritual adultery. It says in 1 Kings 11:4 that his foreign wives turned his heart toward idols. All right, last few verses here, 27, 28. Very difficult verses to read. Or we get down toward the end of this passage, verses 27 and 28. We have a very difficult couple of verses here. And I want to read to you out of a translation called The Voice. It is not a paraphrase. It is actually a translation, but it kind of reads like a paraphrase. It's just a fresh way of looking at things. 27 says, "Look at this. After investigating the matter thoroughly to find out why things are as they are, I realize that although I kept on searching, I have not found what I am looking for. Only one man in 1,000 have I found, but I could not find a single woman among all these who know this. Here's what I figured out." This is verse 29. "God made humanity for good, but we humans go out and scheme our way into trouble." And so, reading it out of a Voice translation, it makes a little more sense to me, at least. Here we see Solomon's not being anti-woman. It's almost like, I found one guy and had some knowledge, and you can ask 1,000 women, and none of them was smart at all. That's not what he's saying here. We got to remember that he's writing, and when he's writing to a male audience. And remember, back in the day, okay, we're not condoning this. We're just stating facts that women were not as equal as men. So that's probably playing into it as well. Also, what was that number of concubines and wives he had? 1,000? He's talking about 1,000 here. Could be a time, maybe not. I think it may be a reference here. Of the 1,000 women he had available to him, they did not really understand all this truth that he's trying to come across here. So here's the final analysis for this week in verse 29. That God originally made people upright. He made them holy, but they pursued many schemes, or they are sinners as well. And I'd like to read Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 20, because this sounds like something right out of the New Testament. "There is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins." Wow, that's just like the Romans verse, "All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God," isn't it? Solomon recognizes this. We are sinful people, and because we're sinful people, we are incapable of having true wisdom, because our souls, our spirits are marred, they're tainted. There's no way we can truly, not just understand, because that's knowledge, but have the wisdom, 100% wisdom like God does. I'll leave you with this final verse out of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25. It says, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." God is so much other than what we are. So that's all I've got for you for today. Hope you have a great Sunday school lesson. Thanks, guys, for watching.